The Little Rabbit's Garden. Chapter 1. The Small Garden. In a sunny meadow, there lived a little rabbit named Rosie. Rosie loved gardening and had a small garden near her burrow. She planted seeds for carrots, lettuce, and colorful flowers. Every day, she watered and took care of her garden. Chapter 2. The Hungry Birds. One morning, Rosie saw some hungry birds flying over her garden. They were looking for food to eat. The birds saw the juicy carrots and tasty lettuce in Rosie's garden. They decided to come back at night to eat them. Chapter 3. Protecting the Garden. Rosie noticed that some of her plants were missing the next day. She realized that the birds must have eaten them. To protect her garden, Rosie came up with an idea. She made a scarecrow using old clothes and sticks. Chapter 4. Meeting the Birds. That night, when the birds came back to eat, they saw the scarecrow standing in the garden. But instead of being scared away, they were curious. One brave bird approached the scarecrow and found out it was just clothes and sticks. The birds decided to talk to Rosie instead of eating her plants. Chapter 5. Sharing the Garden. Rosie met with the birds and explained how much she loved her garden. The birds apologized for eating her plants without asking. Rosie suggested sharing her garden with the birds. She showed them which plants were safe to eat and even planted some extra food just for them. Chapter 6. New Friends. From that day on, Rosie and the birds became good friends. The birds helped Rosie by eating pests that could harm her plants. Rosie shared her fresh vegetables with the birds every day. They all enjoyed each other's company in the beautiful garden. Chapter 7. A Happy Garden. The garden grew bigger and more beautiful because of Rosie and the birds working together. People from nearby villages came to see Rosie's garden and were amazed by its beauty and harmony between animals and plants. The Brave Firefighter. Chapter 1. The Fire Station. In a small town called Oakdale, there was a fire station where brave firefighters worked. One of these firefighters was a man named Jack. Jack loved his job and was always ready to help people in need. He had a big red fire truck and all the necessary equipment to fight fires. Chapter 2. The Big Fire. One day, a big fire broke out in an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The flames were high and spreading quickly. People were trapped inside, and they needed help fast. Jack and his team jumped into action, driving their fire truck to the scene. Chapter 3. Rescuing People. When they arrived, Jack saw that the fire was very dangerous. But he didn't hesitate. He put on his protective gear and went inside to rescue those trapped. He found an old lady who couldn't walk and carried her outside to safety. Then, he went back in to find more people. Chapter 4. Finding the Children. As Jack searched through the smoke-filled building, he heard children crying for help. He followed the sound until he found two little kids hiding under a table. Jack picked them up and carried them outside where their parents were waiting anxiously. Chapter 5. Putting out the Fire. After rescuing everyone, Jack and his team focused on putting out the fire. They used powerful hoses and water to extinguish the flames. It took some time, but eventually, they managed to put out the fire completely. Chapter 6. Celebrating Heroes. The next day, the whole town celebrated Jack and his team for their bravery. People thanked them for saving lives and property. Jack smiled humbly but felt proud knowing he had made a difference. Chapter 7, Continuing to Help. From that day on, Jack continued to help people in need whenever there was an emergency. He became known as one of Oakdale's bravest firefighters. And every time someone needed help, they knew they could count on Jack and his team. The Little Artist. Chapter 1, The Colorful Studio. In a small town called Sunnyvale, there was a little artist named Emma. She had a colorful studio where she loved to paint and draw. Emma's studio was filled with paints, brushes, canvases, and all sorts of art supplies. She spent most of her days creating beautiful artwork. Chapter 2, The Broken Park. One day, Emma noticed that the local park was looking sad and broken. The swings were rusty, the slides were cracked, and the benches were old. Emma decided to use her art to make the park a happier place. She started by painting bright colors on the swings and slides. Chapter 3, Painting the Park. Emma worked hard every day to transform the park into a vibrant playground. She painted flowers on the benches and drew fun designs on the pavement. Children from the town watched her work and were excited to see their park changing into a beautiful place. Chapter 4, Meeting New Friends. As Emma painted, she met new friends who wanted to help her. There was Tom, who fixed the rusty swings, Sarah, who planted new flowers, and Jack, who repainted the benches. Together, they made the park look brand new and full of life. Chapter 5, The Big Reveal. After many days of hard work, Emma and her friends were ready to show off their newly transformed park. They invited everyone in Sunnyvale to come and see what they had done. The town gathered at the park and was amazed by its beauty. Children played happily on the swings and slides while adults sat on the colorful benches enjoying the scenery. Chapter 6, Celebrating Creativity. The town celebrated Emma's creativity and hard work by throwing her a big party. People thanked her for making their park such a wonderful place. Emma smiled proudly knowing that her art had brought joy to so many people. Chapter 7, Continuing to Create. From that day on, Emma continued to use her art to make Sunnyvale an even more beautiful place. She painted murals on buildings and created sculptures for public spaces. And every time someone needed help or inspiration, they knew they could count on Emma and her artistic talents. The Kind Baker. Chapter 1, The Cozy Bakery. In a small town called Willow Creek, there was a cozy bakery run by a kind baker named Mrs. Thompson. She made the most delicious bread, cakes, and pastries in town. Every morning, the sweet aroma of freshly baked goods filled the air, making everyone's mouth water. Chapter 2, Helping the Neighbors. Mrs. Thompson loved helping her neighbors. One day, she noticed that Mrs. Johnson, who lived next door, was feeling sad because she couldn't bake for her grandkids due to an injury. Mrs. Thompson decided to help by baking some treats for Mrs. Johnson's grandkids. She made colorful cupcakes and a big chocolate cake. Chapter 3, Spreading Joy. When Mrs. Johnson's grandkids came over, they were thrilled to see the delicious treats Mrs. Thompson had made for them. Their faces lit up with joy as they enjoyed the tasty goodies. Mrs. Johnson thanked Mrs. Thompson warmly for her kindness and generosity. Chapter 4, The Big Storm. One evening, a big storm hit Willow Creek. Strong winds blew, and heavy rain poured down. Many people lost power and were left without food or warmth. Mrs. Thompson knew she had to do something to help her community. She opened her bakery as a shelter where people could come in out of the storm. Chapter 5: Feeding the Community. Mrs. Thompson worked tirelessly to bake bread and soup for everyone who came into her bakery. She also provided warm blankets and hot drinks to keep people cozy. The community came together in her bakery, sharing stories and supporting each other through the difficult time. Chapter 6: Celebrating Kindness. After the storm passed, the town celebrated Mrs. Thompson's kindness and generosity. People thanked her for opening her bakery as a shelter during their time of need. The mayor presented Mrs. Thompson with an award for her community service, praising her selflessness and compassion. Chapter 7: Continuing to Help. From that day on, Mrs. Thompson continued to help those in need whenever she could. Her bakery became more than just a place to buy food, it was a symbol of community spirit and kindness. And every time someone needed help, they knew they could count on Mrs. Thompson and her cozy bakery. The Magical Tree House. Chapter 1: The Old Tree. In a small village called Greenhaven, there was an old tree with branches that seemed to stretch up to the sky. A young boy named Max loved to play around this tree. Max had always dreamed of building a treehouse in this magnificent tree. Chapter 2: Building the Treehouse. One sunny day, Max decided to start building his treehouse. He gathered materials like wood, nails, and a hammer. With the help of his friends, Emma and Sam, they worked hard to build the treehouse. They designed it with windows, a door, and even a small balcony. Chapter 3: Discovering Magic. As they finished the treehouse, something magical happened. The tree began to glow softly in the evening light. Max, Emma, and Sam were amazed as they saw that the treehouse had become a magical place. They could see stars twinkling through the windows even during the day. Chapter 4: Meeting the Guardian. One night, while they were in the treehouse, they heard a gentle voice calling out to them. It was an old owl who introduced himself as Oakley, the guardian of the tree. Oakley told them that this was no ordinary tree, but a magical one that granted wishes to those who treated it with kindness and respect. Chapter 5: Making Wishes. Excited by this news, Max, Emma, and Sam decided to make wishes. Max wished for endless adventures, Emma wished for infinite creativity, and Sam wished for boundless knowledge. As they made their wishes, sparkling lights filled the air around them. Chapter 6: Seeing Wishes Come True. The next day, they saw their wishes come true. Max found himself on an exciting adventure through the forest, Emma created beautiful art pieces effortlessly, and Sam understood complex books with ease. They realized that their kindness and friendship had made their wishes possible. Chapter 7: Protecting the Tree. From that day on, Max, Emma, and Sam made sure to protect the magical tree and its guardian Oakley. They kept the area clean and ensured no harm came to it. In return, the tree continued to grant them small wishes whenever they needed help or guidance.